Welcome, Fright Night Vault listeners. Tonight's case doesn't come from an abandoned asylum, a forgotten road, or a place people already whisper about. It comes from a quiet suburban block with trimmed lawns, HOA rules, and neighbors who wave at each other while taking out the trash. On paper, nothing about this street should attract attention. No violent history, no burned houses, no missing person clusters. But when you look closer at what happened behind one particular fence, you start to see the same pattern I've seen in other files. Someone disturbed the wrong piece of ground at the wrong depth in the wrong place, and something under that soil decided it was done being left alone. I've reviewed the father's written account, the audio notes he left himself when he couldn't sleep, and the messages he sent to a friend when he was still trying to convince himself this could all be explained away. And the more I followed his timeline, the more I realized this wasn't just about a strange object being dug up. The figurine he found wasn't cursed in the way most people think. It wasn't a toy, it wasn't a keepsake, and it wasn't meant to be seen. It was a marker, a seal, placed above something that should have stayed buried. This family thought they were just planting a tree. What they really did was open a passage between their safe little backyard and a presence that had been pressed into the earth long before their house even existed. As you listen, I want you to pay attention to how slowly it starts, how normal everything seems, and how the house itself begins to change once the seal is broken. Subscribe to the vault and never walk alone again. Tonight's audio horror. Disturbing suburban haunting, the presence unearthed in our backyard, starts now. He told me he remembered that Saturday like a photograph that never fades, not because of anything that happened at the time, but because of what he knows was waiting just under his feet. He said the day itself was simple, the kind of weekend afternoon you forget as soon as Monday comes, the sky a flat, pale blue, a few leaf blowers humming in the distance. The smell of someone grilling 2 doors down, and his kids running in and out of the sliding door, dragging bits of grass across the floor that he kept meaning to sweep up. And his wife had left a young maple tree against the fence with a note taped to it reminding him she wanted it planted before the end of the month. So he finally decided to do it. Not because of any special meaning, just because it was time. And he grabbed a shovel from the garage and walked out to that unused strip of yard along the back fence where nothing really grew, a narrow rectangle of stubborn grass and hard-packed dirt that nobody thought about. He said the first thing that felt off wasn't anything dramatic. It was the quiet, a kind of quiet he only noticed because he'd been in that yard 100 times, usually hearing at least a faint buzz of insects or a dog barking somewhere. But that afternoon, the moment he stepped to that back edge, the sound seemed to thin out, like someone had closed a door on the rest of the neighborhood. Not total silence, just muted. And he told himself he was imagining it, that he'd been stuck inside working all week and was just noticing things differently. So he pressed the shovel into the soil and started digging, the top layer giving way the way he expected, dry, dusty, with shallow roots and small stones. But a few inches down, the resistance changed. The ground went from crumbly to dense, from forgiving to stubborn, and he felt the handle vibrate with each thrust like he was pushing through something that didn't want to be disturbed. He'd dug holes in that yard before for posts and plants and kids' projects, and nothing had ever felt like this. The blade kept glancing off something harder than soil, but not quite rock. And as he worked, he said he felt the air grow a little cooler around him. Not a gust of wind, not a weather shift. More like the temperature drop you feel when you open a basement door that's been closed for a while. He ignored it, kept digging, his breath settling into a rhythm with the shovel, until finally, at around 18 inches, the metal hit something that sounded wrong. Not the sharp ring of stone, not the hollow thud of a root, but a dense muted knock, like hitting the side of an old ceramic jar buried in sand. And curiosity crawled up his spine as he dropped to his knees and started clearing the dirt away by hand. He said his fingers brushed something unnaturally smooth under the clay, smooth and cold, and he scooped until the top of it emerged. a small figurine about the length of his palm, its surface carved with deep vertical grooves and intersecting lines that didn't match any pattern he recognized, the head rounded but featureless, the body narrow and simple, almost like an unfinished human shape. What bothered him immediately wasn't the design, it was the temperature. He said it felt like he'd just pulled it out of a freezer, so cold that it burned his fingertips. And yet it had been buried under sun-warmed soil all day. He turned it over, brushing the dirt from its grooves, and noticed that despite being packed in clay, it didn't feel gritty. It felt clean, too clean, like the dirt hadn't actually clung to it the way it should have, and the weight of it was wrong too. It looked like it should be light, maybe ceramic, maybe cheap stone. But when he lifted it fully, it felt heavy enough to strain his wrist, dense, as if filled with lead. He stood there for a moment, kneeling by the open hole, holding this cold, heavy thing in his hand, with the sense that he had just picked up something that didn't belong to his time. He said part of him wanted to drop it back in, to cover the hole, to forget he had ever seen it, but another part, the ordinary, rational part, told him it was probably nothing, that people had lived on that land for decades. Maybe someone dropped it before the house was built. Maybe it was some weird garden ornament that had been buried years ago. So he swallowed the unease, told himself not to be dramatic, and walked back into the house with the figurine pressed against his palm, feeling its coldness seep into his skin with every step. When he set it in the kitchen sink and ran water over it, he expected to see dark mud wash away. But the water ran almost clear after the first few seconds, as if the dirt that had covered it hadn't really attached, and he watched the tiny streams of water run around the carvings without filling them the way they should have. He turned off the tap, and the final drip of water hit the basin with an echo that seemed too loud for a quiet afternoon. He dried the figurine with a dish towel, the fabric making no sound as it slid across the surface, and he placed it on the far corner of the counter, telling himself he'd look it up online later, maybe even ask his wife if she recognized the style. Then he finished the hole, planted the tree, watered it, and tried to move on with his day. But he said the rest of that afternoon never felt quite normal. The house had a faint chill to it, the kind you might blame on the AC, even though the thermostat hadn't been touched. Rooms he walked through felt a degree or two cooler than they had that morning, and whenever he passed the kitchen doorway, he felt his eyes pulled toward that corner of the counter where the figurine sat, small and motionless, but somehow demanding attention like an extra person in the room who refused to speak. And each time he glanced at it, he had the odd sensation that he'd interrupted something, like he'd walked in while someone was mid-sentence and they'd gone quiet the moment he appeared. He didn't say anything about it to his wife, didn't mention the cold, didn't tell her about the noise the shovel had made when it hit that buried surface. He told himself the feeling would fade once he slept. That's what he kept repeating as he went to bed that night. But around 2:40 a.m., he woke up with his heart pounding for no reason he could explain. No nightmare, no sound at first, just a feeling that something in the house had shifted. Then he heard it, a faint tapping, 3 soft knocks, a pause, then 3 more, not loud enough to be a person banging, not irregular like pipes, slow and deliberate like someone testing a wall with their knuckles. He listened, trying to pinpoint the direction, and realized it was coming from downstairs, from somewhere near the kitchen. He didn't want to get up, but he knew he wouldn't sleep if he stayed in bed, so he slid out carefully so he wouldn't wake his wife and descended the stairs in the low light spilling from a nightlight in the hall. He said, the moment his bare foot touched the first floor, the air felt colder, as if he'd walked into a room that had been left unheated for days. And as he turned the corner, he saw that the kitchen ceiling had a faint glow. The overhead light was on, even though he was sure he'd shut everything off before bed. He stepped into the doorway and stopped, because there, at the center of the dining table, perfectly aligned with the runner his wife kept in the middle, sat the figurine, facing him. He stared at it, trying to reconstruct the evening in his mind, asking himself if he could have moved it without remembering. But there was nothing. The last time he'd seen it had been on the far corner of the counter, nowhere near the table, and now it sat in the exact center as if it had always belonged there. He stood there for what felt like a full minute, counting his breaths, waiting for some rational explanation to present itself. He told me he even thought maybe his wife had found it, thought it was interesting, and set it on the table. But she was a deep sleeper and hadn't come downstairs, and there were no other noises in the house, only that heavy quiet again, that feeling of being watched by a room. Eventually, he forced himself to move, walked over, picked up the figurine, and felt the same sharp, cold spike through his fingers, as if the object had been sitting in snow instead of a climate-controlled house, and he placed it back on the kitchen counter where it had been, this time tucking it farther back near the backsplash as though distance would change anything. Then he turned the light off and started back up the stairs. He said when he reached the top step, he heard it, a single soft scrape on the wood at the bottom, too light to be a person, too intentional to be the house settling, and every hair on his arm stood up. But he didn't turn around. He didn't want to see if anything was there. He just walked faster into the bedroom, got back under the covers, and lay awake until morning, telling himself it was nothing. He was tired. He'd misremembered where he'd put it. That's all. The next day, he made breakfast, packed lunches, and tried to slip back into routine, but he said the house still felt a little off. Sounds didn't bounce the same way. Footsteps felt slightly muffled, and when his wife commented that the place felt cooler than usual, he laughed it off, said he'd check the vents later, but he never did. Not that day. Instead, his attention kept being pulled toward the kitchen again and again, and by late afternoon he swore he could sense when he was about to catch the figurine in his peripheral vision, like an itch in the side of his awareness. And then his daughter refused to walk into her bedroom, just stood in the doorway clutching her stuffed animal, staring at the far corner near the dresser, with her shoulders tensed the way kids get when they're fighting tears but trying not to cry. He knelt down and asked her what was wrong, and she didn't say, "monster," or "I'm scared." She just lifted a small shaking finger, pointed, and whispered, "He's there." He asked her who she meant, thinking maybe she'd seen a shadow or a coat hung wrong, and after a long pause she said, very softly, "The man in the dirt." And somewhere in the back of his mind, something snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, just a click of understanding that tied the phrase to the hole in the yard and the thing he had pulled from it. He walked into the room, checked behind the dresser, in the closet, under the bed, under every piece of furniture, and found nothing. But the air in that far corner was colder, enough that he could feel it on the back of his hand. Standing still, he could sense a faint pressure there, an emptiness that felt occupied. He didn't let his daughter see his face. He just told her it was okay, that sometimes rooms feel spooky for no reason, and gently diverted her to the living room. And all the while, he knew exactly what was sitting on the counter downstairs and exactly what patch of earth he had disturbed to bring it inside. So he carried the weight of that knowledge in silence as he walked back through the hallway, wondering how long the house had been watching all of them before anyone noticed. And by dusk, he felt that same coldness creep into the walls again. Felt the stillness settle like a layer of frost over the ordinary noise of a family evening. And when he stepped into the kitchen to get a drink, he froze because the figurine, the one he had placed deep in the corner of the counter earlier, now sat in the exact center of the dining table again, positioned like someone had carefully measured the distance from each edge. And the way it faced down the hallway instead of the backyard, this time told him something had changed direction, changed interest, and he felt an instinctual dread in the pit of his stomach that convinced him beyond doubt that it was no coincidence, that the object hadn't shifted by some trick of gravity or a stray bump. Something had placed it there. And the next morning, he found every dining chair pulled away from the table in a perfect ring, as though invisible guests had been seated there in the night. And the figurine sat not in the center this time, but in his own chair, angled slightly as if turned toward something only it could see. And when he moved it to the garage, putting it high on a shelf behind old paint cans, he felt some relief, until he returned to the kitchen moments later and saw all the chairs pushed neatly back under the table with a precision that made the hairs on his arms rise, because nothing in the house made that kind of sound. No scraping, no shifting, no footstep. and he realized then that whatever had carried the object inside was moving silently, deliberately, and without any need to hide its presence. And that afternoon, footsteps began pressing into the ceiling above him, slow and direct, each one spaced too evenly to be the chaotic scurry of an animal, and the hollow creak of the attic boards carried through the house like the footsteps of someone stretching limbs long unused. And when he checked the attic later that day, the door latch was still closed, but the dust on the floor told another story. Long streaks of soil smeared as though something had dragged itself from one end to the other, leaving behind flakes of clay and a faint smell of wet earth. And in the farthest corner near the insulation, he saw a shape pull itself into the shadow with a motion not possible for anything living, a jerking shudder as though trying to remember how to control its own limbs. And he backed away so slowly he didn't even feel his hand find the light switch. He just knew he needed to close that door and pretend he hadn't seen what he'd seen. But that night the whispering began, low and rhythmic. Not words he understood, but a pattern that made the air feel thinner like a chant muffled through layers of earth. And sometimes the whispering came from behind the walls, sometimes from the ceiling, once from directly beneath the floorboards. And by the fifth night, his entire house had fallen into an unnatural silence broken only when something wanted to be heard. And that night, the air felt thick enough to taste, the darkness holding the shape of a presence that no longer felt content with the attic. The whispering gave way to footsteps traveling the hallway outside their bedroom in a slow, dragging gait. And when he lifted his head, he saw through the sliver of light under the door the shadow of something stopping directly in front of their room, lingering long enough for him to feel its interest in what lay behind the door. And he reached for his wife's hand without thinking, squeezing it tight enough that she stirred awake and whispered his name in a shaky voice, and he shook his head silently because he didn't want to draw any attention. They lay there holding their breath until the shadow finally moved again, drawn away toward the children's rooms. And when he heard the soft push of his daughter's door easing open, he nearly jumped out of bed. But fear pinned him down because something in the stillness told him any movement might invite the presence into their reality more forcefully. And then came the scrape beneath their own bed, slow, testing, like fingers dragging along the underside of the mattress as the temperature of the room dropped to something unnatural. And when he dared to look over the side, he saw a gray, soil-layered hand, long, cracked joints stiff, reaching out slowly toward his daughter sleeping on the floor, its fingers hovering inches above her blanket as if feeling for warmth. And he pulled her gently onto the bed, forcing no sound from his throat, the hand pausing as though listening, then withdrawing with the same slow patience, slipping backward into the dark beneath the bed frame. And he didn't sleep the rest of the night because each time he closed his eyes, he felt the soft throb of movement in the floor beneath him, as if something was tunneling in the wood, replacing it grain by grain with packed earth. And when dawn came, he checked under the bed and found nothing but a thin streak of dark soil spreading toward the wall, a trail so faint it almost disappeared in the light. But it told him something important. The thing had not just entered the house. It was integrating itself into it, merging with the structure from the inside out, turning walls hollow like burial tunnels and spreading cool air through the vents like underground drafts. And he packed the kids into the car that morning, insisting to his wife that they just needed a change of scenery for the day. But his hands shook on the steering wheel as he drove because each glance into the rearview mirror showed his children staring at the passing houses with the same unfocused expression, their eyes fixed on nothing as though listening to a voice too low for him to hear. And when they reached the park, he watched them play, or pretend to, but they kept stopping, looking at the dirt, poking at the ground absent-mindedly. And when he asked his son what he was doing, the boy said, "The ground is humming." And that was the moment he knew distance alone wouldn't save them, because the presence was no longer tied to one place. It had attached itself to them, their scent, their breath, their movement. And by the time they drove to a motel that night, hoping to outrun whatever followed them, he could feel something shifting under the carpet as soon as he stepped through the door, the floor giving a faint bounce like loose soil beneath thin wood. and when he opened the nightstand drawer to grab a pen, he found inside a perfect ring of dry clay dust, so thin it cracked when he breathed on it, and he realized he had simply given the entity a new room to spread into, a new structure to learn, a new set of walls to adapt as its own. And that night he didn't sleep because every few minutes something rustled behind the bathroom door, a soft, dragging sound like a limb being moved piece by piece. And sometime before dawn his son woke crying, claiming someone had whispered his name from the vent, a whisper that didn't sound like a person, didn't sound like air, sounded like something pressing its face close into the duct and breathing the word out through soil-packed teeth. And that morning he knew there was only one option left. He had to return to the backyard, to the exact point where the seal had been broken, because if the entity was bound to the act of disturbance rather than to the place itself, then restoring the seal was the only way to detach it from his family. And as he drove back, the farther he got from the motel, the warmer the air felt, as if moving back toward the source aligned something the entity needed to settle. And when he pulled into the driveway, the entire neighborhood looked painfully ordinary. Kids riding bikes, sprinklers kicking on across the street. But the yard behind his house felt like a different landscape entirely the moment he stepped into it. He felt the heat drop, felt the air thicken the way it had when he first dug the hole, and the indentation had changed. The soil beneath the maple trees sagged downward a few more inches, as if the earth itself had inhaled and not exhaled, and when he knelt down, he felt vibrations beneath the surface, faint but real, like something shifting its weight deep beneath. He brushed aside the loose dirt and saw markings he hadn't noticed before, carved faintly into the clay, circular symbols that spread outward from the hole, like the outline of a lid or boundary he had unknowingly broken. So he leaned closer, brushing away more soil until he felt the curved top of something solid beneath the clay, not like rock, not like wood, but like a sealed chamber lid buried just deep enough to be forgotten. And the moment his fingers touched it, he heard a soft crunch of steps behind him, not quick, not aggressive, but slow and patient, like something standing up after a very long time. And when he turned, he saw it. The man in the dirt, fully formed now, its cracked gray skin shedding fragments of earth with each breath, its limbs stiff like they hadn't moved freely in years, its hollow eyes fixed not on him but on the indentation in the ground where the seal had been disturbed, and it walked forward with a strange, broken steadiness, like a memory learning itself again, each step pressing shallow prints of soil into the grass, and he realized with a sickening clarity that it was not coming toward him out of hunger or hatred, but out of instinct, out of necessity, returning to the precise location it had been sealed under, because some things don't haunt out of malice. They haunt because they are displaced, unanchored, yearning to sink back into the dark that once held them, and it knelt beside the hole with a slowness that made the ground vibrate, placing its hand flat into the soil exactly where he had dug, and he saw the earth pulse faintly beneath its palm like a second heartbeat answering a call, and when it finally lifted its head toward him, he felt his entire body freeze because the look it gave him wasn't threatening. It was hollow, resigned, as if communicating in silence that something had to take its place, that a space disturbed must be filled, and the ground beneath his feet softened again, the soil loosening as though preparing to accept him, pulling at the bottom of his shoes with a faint suction, and he stumbled back in terror, scrambling across the grass, his fingers scraping the ground until they brushed against the figurine lying by the fence, placed there with precise intention as if the entity had positioned it for him, and in a moment of desperate clarity, he grabbed it and drove it into the center of the hole with all the force he had left, pushing the carved base into the soft clay until the faint circular marks aligned perfectly with its grooves, and instantly the earth reacted, sucking the figurine downward with a deep muted pull like a breath drawn inward, the soil collapsing around it with unnatural speed, and the entity jerked as if something had tugged at its core, its cracked body folding forward, collapsing inward as sheets of dry earth sloughed off in fragments, each layer dissolving back into the soil until its shape disintegrated completely, leaving only the settling dirt behind, smoothing over as though nothing had stood there at all, and the air warmed around him, the pressure lifting, the silence breaking, as if the world released a breath it had been holding. And he stumbled backward onto the grass, gasping, feeling the ground solid beneath him for the first time in days, and he ran to the car shouting for his wife to drive, leaving the yard shrinking behind him in the rearview mirror until the house became nothing but a shadow lost among other identical houses, and in the weeks that followed, the home remained empty. The maple trees stood undisturbed, and the soil settled into the flat, even surface of a yard no one would suspect held anything beneath it. But he told me the dread didn't fade completely because the memory of the ground softening beneath him stayed lodged under his ribs, and whenever he walked across open fields or construction sites, he felt a shiver climb his spine at the sight of freshly turned earth, because now he understood something he hadn't known before. That the world beneath us is older than the stories built on top of it, that some graves are deeper than history can record, and that some seals are placed not to hide evil, but to keep balance, to prevent something lost and hollow from rising again. And he says, even now, months later, in the quiet moments when his children sleep in the next room and the house settles into its nightly sighs, he sometimes wakes at 2:40 a.m. with the unshakable feeling that something is listening for him through the layers of soil beneath his feet, waiting for the ground to shift in just the wrong way. Because once you disturb the earth in the wrong place, you never forget the sound it makes when something buried begins to move. Well, Fright Night Vault listeners, that concludes this case. And after examining every detail this family provided, the notes, the timestamps, the patterns repeating in each location they fled to, the most unsettling truth is also the simplest. The ground remembers what it's been asked to hold. Disturbing something meant to stay buried doesn't always unleash rage or chaos. Sometimes it releases need, a quiet gravitational pull toward equilibrium that demands to be restored. This man didn't awaken a monster. He displaced a presence that had been sealed with intention long before property lines and backyard fences divided the land. And whatever left that figurine as its marker wasn't trying to decorate the earth, it was warning the future. If you have a horror story of your own, feel free to share it in the comments below. You never know. The next story could be yours. Subscribe to The Vault and never walk alone again.